Hello there, and welcome to the Sleepless Scientist, a quiet place in the cosmos where your thoughts can unwind and knowledge becomes a soft lullaby for the night. Tonight's journey will take us into a question that has lingered in both science and philosophy for generations, a question that sits gently at the crossroads of physics, perception, and the mystery of being alive. The observer paradox, and whether time travel, in any form, quietly depends on consciousness itself. But before you settle in and get cozy, I'd love if you could take a moment to like this video and subscribe, only if you truly find these quiet explorations comforting. And when you're ready, you can leave a comment to tell me where in the world you're listening from and what time it is for you right now. It is always a small joy to see the many corners of the earth gathering here, each with its own little slice of time. For now, feel free to dim the lights, perhaps let a soft fan hum in the background, and allow your breathing to slow. We will move at an easy pace. If your mind begins to drift at any point, that is perfectly fine. You can let it wander. We will still be here, gently unfolding the story together. So, let us begin this quiet journey into the observer paradox, and the thought that time itself might lean ever so slightly toward the direction of your awareness. There is a peculiar feeling that many people have encountered at least once in their lives, the sense that the world changes a little when they pay attention to it. Not dramatically, not like a scene in a movie, but in small, delicate ways. The way the air feels different when you truly listen to it. The way a room seems to brighten when you take a moment to observe the light upon a wall. The way a still surface of water receives a pebble, and how the ripples continue long after the small stone disappears beneath the surface. It is an unspoken intuition, this idea that noticing something shifts it ever so slightly. And as strange as it sounds, the universe itself seems to behave in ways that make this intuition feel a little less whimsical than one might expect. Long before anyone spoke of observers, paradoxes, or consciousness, nature had already woven this delicate pattern into its fabric. When scientists first began peering into the smallest building blocks of the world, the particles so tiny they slip through our everyday imagination, they found that these tiny travellers behaved in surprisingly intimate ways with whatever attempted to study them. Not because the particles cared, of course, but because the act of interacting with them, even gently, sent tiny ripples through their world. Imagine a quiet hallway lined with doors, each door representing a possible direction a tiny particle might take. When no one is watching, the particle drifts like a wandering traveller, flowing through several doors at once, almost like a soft breeze exploring every corner. But when a detector is placed, even a small, silent device, the traveller seems to pause, choose a single door, and follow that path alone. The rest of the possibilities fade, as if the world gently folds them away. This is not magic, nor is it a trick of consciousness. It is simply how the universe works at its smallest scale, sensitive, responsive, and subtly shaped by interaction. Even the simplest act of trying to see a particle, shining a faint beam of light at it, or placing a detector near its path, nudges it, like tapping the surface of a still pond. There is no harshness in this, only a quiet, inevitable shifting. If you've ever stepped into a dim room and watched the shadows rearrange themselves as your eyes adjust, you already know the feeling. The world you see depends on how you look, and the way you choose to look shapes what appears. And while the shadows in your room are not quantum particles, they share something with them. They respond to observation in ways that form a new image each time. Scientists describe this gently, saying that measuring something changes it. Not in the sense of thought or intent, but in the simple, physical truth that touching anything, even with a beam of light, even with the faintest whisper of energy, leaves a trace. A camera in a supermarket records whether anyone watches the footage or not. A security sensor detects motion without needing a conscious mind to supervise it. The universe observes itself through interaction long before humans learn to do the same. Yet the feeling remains. How strange that anything should change simply because it is noticed. As we drift deeper into this idea, we find ourselves at a threshold where science begins to brush its fingertips against philosophy. If looking changes small things, could it change larger ones? If interactions shape the behaviour of particles, could they also shape the unfolding of time? And perhaps the most delicate question of all, does the universe behave the same way when there is no consciousness to witness it? These are not questions with sharp answers. They are questions with soft edges, like stones in a creek worn smooth by centuries of flowing water. They invite contemplation rather than conclusion. They suggest that being alive, and knowing that you are alive, may place you in a conversation with the universe, one that unfolds moment by moment, quietly, like breathing. In the smallest corners of reality, the act of noticing already matters, and although it does not require consciousness to change a particle's path, consciousness adds something else, a thread that ties together moments, one after another, forming a story. Without that thread, events would still occur, but they would lack the soft continuity that gives meaning to time as you experience it. Perhaps that is why the observer paradox feels so personal. It is not only about particles and detectors, it is about the simple experience of being here, aware, watching time pass. As we let this thought rest, like a pebble settling to the bottom of a pond, we can follow its gentle ripples toward a larger question, whether this quiet sensitivity of the universe hints at a deeper relationship between the mind that observes and the time it moves through. There is a gentle truth resting beneath the surface of the world, a truth that quietly reveals itself when we try to look too closely at anything that is very, very small. It is a truth that does not shout, nor does it make demands. It simply waits, patient and quiet, until someone asks a question that touches the very foundation of how the universe behaves. And when the question is asked, when we try to pinpoint exactly where a tiny particle is, or exactly how it is moving, the universe answers in a way that feels almost like a whispered riddle. You may know one thing clearly, but never both at once. Scientists often describe this behaviour with a principle that says something like, the more precisely you know the place, the less precisely you know the motion, and vice versa. It sounds abstract, but it carries the softness of a shadow drifting across a wall. Imagine holding a firefly in the dark. If you clasp your hands tightly around it to know its exact position, you lose all sense of how it might have been fluttering a moment earlier. But if you open your hands and let it dance freely, you know the direction of its movement, yet its exact resting place becomes hazy, like a memory fading just as you reach for it. This is one of the universe's more delicate patterns, a balance between knowing and not knowing, as if precision in one dimension creates a gentle blur in another. There is no formula to recite aloud here, nothing sharp or mathematical for your mind to wrestle with, only the idea itself softened into something you can picture without strain, a firefly in your hands, a shadow slipping away when you try to follow it too directly. The same quiet puzzle appears in one of the most calming, almost story-like experiments in physics, the one with two narrow openings and a stream of tiny particles wandering through them. You can imagine it in the soft glow of twilight, a narrow wall with two slits like two thin windows, and behind it a screen where gentle specks of light will appear. When no one tries to check which slit a particle passes through, the pattern on the screen becomes beautifully complex, like ripples overlapping on a calm lake. It is as if the particles drift through both slits at the same time, exploring possibilities the way a traveller might wander down more than one path in a dream. But when a detector, a simple quiet device, is placed to watch which path the particle chooses, the pattern changes instantly. The soft complexity disappears, replaced by a simpler, straighter arrangement of specks. The The world, when watched closely, seems to choose one path instead of many. And the detector does not need eyes or awareness. It does not need to think or wonder. Its presence alone, its gentle touch on the particle's journey, is enough to reshape what unfolds. This is the heart of the observer effect, softened into an image rather than a rule. The idea that touching something, even lightly, changes it. A fingertip on the surface of a soap bubble makes the colours shift. A single snowflake landing on a branch changes the balance of winter's weight. And in the tiny world of particles, the act of looking, which is really just the act of interacting, becomes another kind of touch. Not a conscious touch, not a mindful one, but a natural, unavoidable part of trying to understand the world. There is something deeply comforting in realizing that this behavior is not about awareness or intention. It is simply the universe responding to interaction the way all things do. A leaf responds when the wind brushes it. A bell responds when a finger taps its side. A particle responds when a device gently tries to see where it has been. Awareness is not required, only contact. And yet, even knowing this, the experiments still leave a faint echo in the mind, a sense that there is something oddly personal hidden inside these patterns. Because while a detector does not need consciousness, we, the observers, shape the story that unfolds around the experiment. We choose what to measure, when to measure it, and what questions to ask. We decide where to place our attention, and the world reveals itself along that line of sight. Perhaps that is why these gentle quantum tales feel, in a strange way, like metaphors for our own experience. There are moments in life when your understanding of something depends entirely on how you look at it. A memory can shift in tone depending on which detail you hold in your heart. A decision can feel different depending on whether you focus on fear or hope. Just as a detector changes the behavior of a particle, your perspective can change the emotional shape of a moment. This does not mean that thought changes the physics of the universe. It simply means that the universe and the mind share a soft, reflective property. Both respond to the nature of attention. And in this shared quality, a quiet bridge forms. A bridge between the external world of particles and the internal world of awareness. Imagine looking at a faint constellation in the night sky. If you stare directly at the star you want to see, it may vanish from sight, hiding just beyond the reach of your focused vision. But if you let your gaze relax, allowing your attention to soften, the star sometimes appears again, shimmering gently at the edge of awareness. This small experience mirrors the quantum world in a way that feels almost poetic. Sometimes you see more by looking less directly. This session is a gentle path into that poetic side of physics, the side that doesn't demand equations or symbols, only images and metaphors that you can hold lightly in your mind. As you drift with these thoughts, you may begin to sense how uncertainty is not a flaw, but a quiet design, allowing room for possibilities to breathe. And perhaps, as we let this idea settle, we can follow its soft trail toward an even more intriguing question. If particles respond to interaction, how does time itself respond to the presence of a mind that moves through it? There is a certain calmness that comes from realizing that the universe does not reveal itself all at once. It is not a book thrown wide open, or a landscape illuminated by a single burst of lightning. Instead, it behaves more like a gentle storyteller, offering only the next sentence, the next small glimpse as we lean closer to listen. And the strange, almost poetic idea put forward by physicist John Wheeler is that the universe may, in some subtle way, wait for our questions before deciding which page to turn to next. This thought is not meant to be grand or mystical. It is simply an invitation to imagine that reality might be a little more interactive than we tend to assume. Wheeler once described the universe with a phrase that sounds almost like a riddle. It from bit. Softly translated, this means something like, things arise from choices, or reality forms itself in response to the questions we ask. Not that consciousness creates the universe, but rather that measurements, interactions, touches, contacts, help determine which possibilities settle into the version of events we see. Imagine again the fog-covered path we spoke of earlier. You stand at the edge of a trail on an early morning when the world is still grey, quiet and cool. Ahead of you is only mist, a soft curtain hiding whatever lies beyond. You take a step forward and the path reveals itself, not all at once, but just enough for you to safely place your foot. Then another small piece appears, and then another. The world unfolds only as needed, only as you move, only as you direct your steps. This is the feeling Wheeler hoped to capture. This sense that the very act of approaching a question shapes the form of the answer. This idea becomes especially gentle and curious when applied to experiments where particles seem to make decisions only after we decide what we want to measure. In some variations of the double-slit experiment, for example, scientists allow the particle to travel through the slits without any device watching it. Only later, well after the particle has already passed the slits, they choose whether to check which path it took or to erase that information entirely. And the outcome, whether the pattern is one of simple paths or layered ripples, seems to align with the choice made in the present moment, even though the particle's journey occurred earlier. Of course, nothing is truly travelling backward in time. There is no message slipping into the past or weaving a contradiction into the world. Instead, the pattern on the screen waits to reveal itself fully until all the relevant information is accounted for. It is as if the universe is saying, "I will show you the final picture once you've finished asking your questions." And in this soft, patient waiting, the experiment seems to echo something deeply human, the way understanding often only emerges once all perspectives are considered, even if they arrive in a different order than expected. Wheeler used these experiments as stepping stones toward a broader reflection about the world. He wondered whether the universe grows more definite and structured as interactions accumulate, not just physical interactions with instruments, but the entire ongoing tapestry of events that leave traces, hints, and marks across time. The world becomes real not suddenly or all at once, but gradually, the way a photograph develops in a tray of solution, its shapes and shadows emerging slowly from the blankness. You might picture the universe as a quiet field covered in morning dew. Every step you take glimmers into existence as sunlight touches it. The field was always there, but the shimmer, the clarity, depends on movement, on attention, on the meeting of foot, light, and ground. Reality in this view is something like that shimmer, a quality that arises in the meeting between what exists and what is asked of it. It is important to note that none of this means the universe needs human awareness to function. Stars formed long before eyes ever opened to admire them. Particles collided and merged long before anyone named them. The universe has always danced its intricate dance, with or without spectators. But the way certain things appear to us, the way they settle into one pattern rather than another, depends on the kind of questions we pose and the nature of the interactions involved. As you imagine these ideas unfolding, let them float like breath on a cold afternoon, forming clouds that drift for a moment before dissolving. Picture reality as a vast library where most of the books are still blank, but the pages fill in softly as you choose which shelves to browse. You never see the entire library at once. You see only the page you're reading, the sentence beneath your finger, the word forming at the edge of your attention. In some ways, this way of thinking makes time feel less like a rigid timeline and more like a story being written as it is read. Not because we invent it, but because the act of moving through time, of asking, touching, measuring, remembering, gives each moment its shape. And perhaps this is where the observer paradox begins to whisper its deeper questions. If reality responds to the nature of our questions in the present, what does it mean when our questions reach toward the past? If the universe completes certain patterns only after all the interactions are considered, how does it handle the delicate thread of time that stretches behind us? These are the kinds of questions that sit gently at the edge of Wheeler's participatory universe, not demanding answers, simply inviting reflection. He once imagined a cosmos where the present helps clarify certain aspects of the past, much like a plot twist near the end of a novel casts new light on an earlier chapter. The story does not change, but your understanding of it does. The past remains intact, yet it feels reshaped by awareness. Perhaps time behaves a little like that. Perhaps the meaning of earlier moments becomes clearer only after later choices unfold, allowing the narrative of reality to be woven with graceful coherence. This does not mean the future alters the past in any literal way. It simply means the story grows more complete as more of it is read, with each page enriching those that came before. As we drift with these thoughts, we slowly turn toward a deeper part of the journey, the realm where time does not simply flow forward but occasionally bends, loops, or folds in subtle ways. And as time takes on new shapes in our imagination, the question of how consciousness moves within it becomes softer, richer, and even more intriguing. There is a moment when you sit very still and let your breath settle, in which time seems to breathe with you. It stretches out just a little, softening around the edges, almost as if it were something gentle and malleable. You may have felt this during a long afternoon when the sunlight grows warm and slow, or during a peaceful night when minutes feel like they float rather than march. And though these sensations are subtle, they echo a deeper truth. Time itself is not as rigid as we once believed. It bends, stretches, and folds in ways that the universe quietly reveals when we learn how to look. For a long time, people imagined time as a perfect, unchanging rhythm, a cosmic metronome that ticks the same everywhere, always. But with patient observation and careful listening, physicists discovered that time behaves more like a river than a ruler. It flows at different speeds depending on where you are and how you move. It slows down when you travel fast, and when you rest near something massive, it relaxes even more, drifting at a calmer pace than it does elsewhere. Picture two clocks. One rests gently in your hand, while the other is carried high into the sky on an airplane. When the travelling clock returns, it is ever so slightly ahead, the faintest whisper of distance between the two. Nothing dramatic, nothing you would ever notice in your day-to-day life, but a soft hint that time has stretched differently along each path. It is as if these clocks lived through subtly different stories, each one carrying the imprint of its journey. This gentle divergence isn't a trick of machinery or a fault in measurement. It is simply the way time responds to motion. When you travel quickly, you experience a slower unfolding of moments compared to someone standing still. Not in a way that you would feel, no sudden stretching or squeezing, but in a way that becomes measurable when the journey is complete. Time, at its heart, is flexible, and mass too shapes this flexibility. Near a planet or star where gravity pulls tightly, time flows a little slower. Far from such heavy anchors, in the quiet emptiness between stars, time unfurls a bit faster. Imagine time as a soft fabric stretched across the universe. A massive object, like a planet, presses into this fabric, creating a gentle indentation. The deeper the indentation, the more slowly time flows for anything resting within it. In the vast cosmic planes where there is little to press down on the fabric, time smooths itself out again, moving with lighter steps. This image, time as a flowing river, as a fabric shaped by mass and motion, helps soften concepts that would otherwise feel sharp and mathematical. There is no need to speak in symbols or equations here. Only the river, the cloth, and the subtle ways they change when touched by movement and gravity. These pictures allow the mind to rest as the ideas slip quietly into place. Even though this stretching of time may feel like a poetic metaphor, it has been observed directly. Astronauts who spend long periods orbiting Earth experience slightly less time than those on the ground. The difference is small, measured in tiny fractions of a second, but it is real. a quiet reminder that time does not pulse equally everywhere. The universe gently keeps track of motion and mass, shaping the tempo of each moment according to the path taken. And in this gentle shaping lies our first glimpse of time travel. Not the dramatic leap across centuries seen in stories, but a slow, steady drift into the future at a slightly different pace. It is a hint that time is not a single track laid rigidly across the cosmos, but a landscape with valleys and slopes, shortcuts and stretches, all connected but not identical. To travel into the future, in a sense, is something we already know how to do. Every astronaut who returns to Earth arrives a tiny bit younger than the world they left, having moved through time at a slightly slower rhythm. Every person who climbs a mountain or flies in a plane experiences time drifting differently from those below. These differences are small, but they whisper of possibilities. The idea that with greater speeds or stronger gravitational fields, the river of time could be shaped even more dramatically. Imagine standing beside a waterfall. The water rushes fiercely downward, yet the stream just a few steps away flows gently and smooth. Both are the same river, yet the experience of time within each part feels different. The image mirrors the universe's quiet truth. The flow of time depends on where you stand and how you move. When we begin to think of time in this flexible way, as something that stretches, slows, and responds to the presence of matter, the idea of time travel becomes less like fantasy and more like a natural extension of how the cosmos behaves. Not a single leap through a tear in reality, but the result of moving differently within the landscape of time itself. Yet even as time bends and stretches under the influence of motion and mass, it remains a steady companion to consciousness. You do not feel time slow when you walk up a hill, or speed when you sit near the sea, even though it does so in tiny quiet ways. Instead, what you feel is the continuous thread of awareness that ties each moment to the next, the rhythm of your own experience, like a gentle drum guiding you forward. This experience of continuity is important because it forms the foundation of the questions we will explore later. If time itself is flexible, then what does consciousness follow? Does it always drift along the softest path? Can it move through loops, bends, or folds in time the same way a particle might? And if consciousness experiences time as a smooth thread, what happens when the fabric of time forms a loop instead of a line? These questions rest just beyond the horizon of this session, like silhouettes of distant hills waiting for the next stretch of the journey. For now, it is enough to sit with the knowledge that time is not the rigid metronome we once imagined. It is a river that responds to motion, a fabric that curves under weight, a gentle presence shaped by the universe itself. And as we move forward, we will slowly step into the places where these curves deepen, where loops begin to form, and where time reveals even stranger possibilities. All of it approached gently, allowing the mind to wander softly through the unfolding landscape. There is a quiet wonder that arises when we begin to imagine time not as a straight line, but as something that can gently curve, twist, or circle back upon itself. It is similar to the feeling you might have when walking a familiar forest trail at dusk. The path winds and loops, leading you past a stream you've already crossed, or a cluster of trees you thought you'd left behind. At first, the repetition feels surprising, but then comforting, as if the world itself is showing you that not every journey must be a forward march. Sometimes, the path returns softly to its own beginning. This idea that time might, under certain strange conditions, allow a moment to loop back into an earlier one, is one of the most intriguing possibilities suggested by the physics of spacetime. It is not a fantasy of portals or shimmering gateways, but a quiet implication of the way gravity and motion shape the universe, especially when those shapes become unusual or extreme. And while these loops remain theoretical, they offer a gentle doorway into understanding why time travel captivates the human mind. It hints at a world where stories might circle instead of stretch, where endings might touch beginnings in a delicate embrace. Imagine time as a long ribbon laid across a table. In the simplest case, the ribbon is smooth and flat, with one direction leading steadily from earlier moments to later ones. But now imagine placing a small weight in the middle of the ribbon. The fabric dips gently around the weight, curving just a little. This is similar to how gravity bends space-time around massive objects. A planet creates a shallow well in the cosmic fabric, a star creates a deeper one, and a collapsed star, a black hole, creates a plunge so steep that even light cannot escape it. Now picture a different gesture, taking the two ends of the ribbon and lifting them until the fabric arches gracefully. With enough curvature, perhaps caused by intense rotation or exotic forms of matter, the ribbon might twist in such a way that one section bends toward another, forming a loop. If an object were to follow the curve of this loop through space-time, it might find itself returning to an earlier moment. Not metaphorically, but literally, as if stepping through a quiet fold in time. Physicists have explored this possibility through various imagined worlds. One such world is the rotating universe proposed by mathematician Kurt Gödel, a cosmos that spins so powerfully that the structure of time curls back on itself. In this imagined universe, a traveller moving along the right path could return to a moment predating their own departure. It is a place where time does not merely pass but folds, creating loops like the swirls in a cup of tea just after you stir it. Another visual picture often used involves tunnels through space-time, gently called wormholes. Instead of thinking of them as tunnels, picture them as two distant points on a sheet of paper. If you leave the sheet flat, the points remain far apart. But if you lift the paper and bring those 2 points closer, the distance shrinks. A wormhole is like that lifted sheet, a shortcut, a bridge connecting two patches of space and time. And if one end of such a bridge were nudged into a different temporal rhythm, slipping slightly into the future or the past, the bridge might serve as a loop through which time could bend. None of this requires symbols or equations to appreciate. The images alone, the ribbon, the spinning universe, the folded page, are enough to let the idea settle softly in the imagination. Time, as it turns out, may not be as linear as a clock's ticking hands suggest. Under certain conditions, it might behave more like a path winding through a landscape, with occasional hidden turns that bring a traveller back to scenes they've already passed. And yet, for all the quiet beauty of this possibility, there is also a delicate tension woven into it. When time loops back on itself, questions begin to form, drifting like autumn leaves in the mind. What does it mean to return to a moment that has already happened? Can two versions of the same person coexist in one instant, like twin shadows cast by different lights? If someone were to step into an earlier moment, would they be stepping into an unfinished page of the story, or a chapter already sealed? These are not questions with quick answers, but gentle invitations to imagine what it would feel like to move within such a world. There is also the emotional curiosity. If time can fold, could memory fold with it? Could a traveller feel drawn toward moments they have already lived, like a familiar melody returning at the end of a long song? The mind, after all, has its own ways of circling back. Memories often loop through our thoughts just as vividly as if they were happening again. Sometimes the heart revisits an old conversation, or a quiet morning long past, as if the inner world itself has created a small time loop. And in that sense, the idea of time bending back does not feel entirely alien. It feels like an echo of something we already know intimately. Physicists sometimes describe these loops as closed paths, which simply means paths that eventually return to the same point in space-time. But even that gentle technical phrase can be softened. You can imagine instead a spiral staircase that curves upward, only to turn back down into the room you first stepped from. You can imagine a long river bending through forests and fields, before circling into the same lake that feeds it. Or you can imagine drawing a circle in the sand, your finger travelling all the way around only to return to the starting grain. These images help the mind rest with the idea that time might not be a single, ever-forward flow, but a landscape capable of loops and curls. They offer comfort to a concept that might otherwise feel dizzying, and as these shapes settle in your imagination, they open the door to the next question. If time can loop, what becomes of consciousness travelling within it? Does the mind trace the loop smoothly, or does it notice the bend? Does awareness itself bend with time, or does it remain a steady thread, unaffected by the curve? These questions wait quietly ahead, like gentle hills approaching as the path winds on. For now, it is enough to sit with the possibility that time, in all its quiet mystery, may be more flexible than it seems, a fabric capable of folding softly back into itself, making room for the curious traveller who steps lightly through its curves. When we imagine time bending back upon itself, touching earlier moments the way a looping path might pass a familiar tree, the mind begins to encounter puzzles that feel at first like firm walls. These puzzles are often called paradoxes. The word itself can sound heavy or intimidating, like something sharp-edged or too logical for a calm night. But paradoxes, when approached gently, are more like small riddles the universe offers, not to confuse us but to invite us to think in softer, broader shapes. They are questions wearing dramatic coats, but beneath the coat their hearts are simple. They ask how a story can make sense when its events begin to circle instead of march. The one most often mentioned is the familiar grandfather paradox, though its name carries a gravity that can feel a little formal. At its core, the idea is simple. Imagine that time forms a loop, allowing someone to step back into an earlier moment in their own history. If that person were to interfere with something essential, something tied to their own existence, the story seems to tangle. How can a traveller prevent their own arrival? And if they prevent it, how could they have travelled at all? It is a loop, but one that twists too sharply, creating a sense of contradiction. Yet this puzzle, when softened, becomes less like a contradiction and more like a question about how stories behave. Imagine writing a novel, then deciding to travel back a few chapters to change a small detail. If the story is tightly woven, altering one thread may pull at many others, requiring rewrites throughout the book. But if the story is flexible, if it allows new versions of events to grow alongside the old, then perhaps both paths can exist side by side. The paradox becomes less about impossibility and more about choosing which narrative shape the universe prefers. Another gentle puzzle is the bootstrap paradox, which has a name that sounds mechanical but is actually quite poetic. This is the idea of something, a melody, a piece of knowledge, a small object, appearing without a clear beginning. Perhaps you give someone a beautiful poem, and years later, after looping through time, you receive that same poem from them, unchanged. Who wrote it? The poem exists, circling around the loop like a bird gliding on a soft current of air, but it has no moment of creation within the loop itself. It feels almost magical, like a story that has always been told but never been authored. These puzzles highlight something tender and intriguing. Our instinct that stories must have beginnings and causes. Time loops challenge this instinct, not because they break the rules of logic, but because they stretch the boundaries of what a story can be. They show us that our usual way of imagining time as a line of events that unfold neatly from cause to effect may be only one of many possible shapes. Now imagine a different kind of paradox, one that feels less like conflict and more like a question of harmony. If time can loop, then perhaps the universe seeks paths that are self-consistent. Paths where events, even when they circle, never contradict one another. Think of a melody that begins softly, crescendos, then returns to its opening notes with perfect alignment. No matter how often it loops, the melody always fits itself. Nothing is out of place. Nothing pulls the music apart. Everything feels balanced. In this perspective, paradoxes are not barriers, they are gentle reminders that loops must be woven carefully. The universe may simply avoid impossible stories the way water avoids shapes it cannot fill, flowing instead into curves that fit its nature. This idea helps soften the puzzles, turning them into reflections about how time might choose pathways that remain coherent and graceful even when they bend. But there is another side to these paradoxes, a side that brings consciousness gently into the conversation. When we tell stories about time travel, we always describe them from the point of view of a traveller who remembers one version of events and witnesses another. It is the traveller who feels the contradiction, the discomfort, the tug between different possibilities. Paradoxes begin to appear the moment a mind attempts to hold two versions of history at once. Without that mind, the loop might simply unfold smoothly, free of conflict. It is the presence of awareness, the sense of self moving through time, that makes these puzzles feel alive. You can imagine this like standing in a garden maze. If you were a drop of water flowing through the maze's channels, you would follow the gentle slopes without confusion. But as a person with memory and intention, you might feel puzzled when you reach a familiar corner from an unexpected direction. The maze hasn't changed, you have. And the paradox arises from the difference between your memory of where you've been and the new path that has brought you here. In this way, the paradoxes of time loops become mirrors that reflect back our expectations about identity and continuity. They show us that consciousness carries a thread of personal history, a sequence of moments stitched together to create a sense of self. When that thread is placed inside a loop instead of a line, the stitching becomes delicate, sometimes tangled. We begin to ask, which version of me is real? Which moment came first? How does the mind hold on to its story when the story itself begins to bend? Yet the universe, as far as we can tell, does not worry. It simply ensures that whatever loops form must remain consistent. Perhaps this consistency arises naturally, the way a river finds the smoothest path through the valley. Or perhaps, in some deeper sense, the universe does not encounter paradoxes. Only humans do, because we bring to time something time itself may not possess. A narrative sense, a need for before and after, for causes and consequences, for stories with structure. Thinking of paradoxes this way removes their sharpness. They become gentle philosophical companions rather than barriers. They invite us to explore the ways consciousness interprets time and how time might behave without the mind's usual demands. They guide us toward the next question. If paradoxes only feel impossible because of the stories we tell ourselves, then what happens when reality chooses one story over another? Does consciousness play any role in selecting which version of events becomes the one we experience? These thoughts settle softly, like leaves drifting to rest on a calm pond, and from their resting place, a new idea begins to rise, the possibility that the universe might quietly align its loops in ways that preserve a coherent story, guiding the mind along pathways that feel continuous even when time itself curves beneath the surface. There is something reassuring about the thought that the universe, vast and mysterious as it is, may prefer harmony over contradiction. Even when time bends and circles, even when events wind back into earlier moments like a quiet spiral, there is a sense that reality seeks coherence, much like the way a river finds the smoothest path around stones, or a melody resolves into notes that feel naturally complete. This idea appears in physics as something often called a principle of consistency, but it can be imagined in much softer terms. The universe avoiding tangled storylines the way a weaver avoids knots in a tapestry. Imagine you're watching a potter at a wheel, shaping a vessel from soft clay. As the wheel spins, the potter's hands move steadily, smoothing out bumps, correcting small imperfections long before they disrupt the final shape. Nothing dramatic, nothing forceful, just a quiet preference for balance. In the same way, some thinkers have suggested that if time ever forms loops, paths that return to earlier moments, events along those loops must naturally align with one another, not through force or intention, but through the universe's gentle shaping, the way clay settles under a steady hand. To picture this, imagine a traveller stepping into a time loop. They walk along the curved path of moments, each one leading softly into the next, until they find themselves drifting back toward a familiar point in the past. It is natural to wonder whether their presence might disrupt that moment, like stepping into the middle of a still pond and creating ripples that change everything. But the idea of self-alignment suggests something different. Rather than allowing contradictions, the universe might guide the traveller's actions so that they fit seamlessly into the history already known. Their presence in the past may already be part of the story, even if they did not realise it. You can think of this as entering a woven rug through one of its patterns. If you lift one thread and move it slightly, the rug adjusts so that the pattern remains intact, shifting its colours and shapes just enough to preserve the whole. A time loop might behave similarly, allowing freedom of movement but quietly guiding events toward outcomes that keep the story coherent. The traveller is not forced into anything. They are simply moving within a tapestry already arranged to avoid contradictions. One way to soften this idea is to imagine drawing a circle in the sand with your fingertip. If you accidentally drift off course and draw a small bump or wobble, the next pass of your finger naturally smooths it out, bringing the circle back into harmony. It is almost as if the shape itself guides your hand towards symmetry. In this analogy, the time loop is the circle, and the universe is your steadying hand, preserving the form even as you move through it. This gentle insistence on consistency feels different from the paradoxes we explored earlier. Where paradoxes seem to create tension, this principle introduces calm. Instead of wondering how events might contradict themselves, we begin to imagine how they might fit beautifully together, even when the path is unusual. The universe may allow the traveller to act freely, but only in ways that complete the loop rather than tear it open. Consider a simple story. A traveller returns to a childhood moment and accidentally drops a small key on the porch. Years later, as a child, they found that key and kept it without knowing where it came from. Now, as the older version of themselves completes the loop, they realise that the key had always been placed by them. Nothing contradicts anything. The loop closes with a soft click like the lid of a music box returning to its start. This kind of story, sometimes described as a self-consistent loop, helps transform the idea of time travel from something chaotic into something almost serene. It reminds us that not every path through time creates problems. Some paths might simply draw elegant circles. In such circles, events may cause themselves in a gentle, harmonious pattern, not because of magic or intention, but because the structure of time allows it. Yet this picture also introduces something subtle about consciousness. If the universe shapes its loops to maintain consistency, what role does a traveller's awareness play? When someone steps into a loop, they carry with them memories, expectations, hopes and fears. Their actions are influenced by their inner story, the quiet thread of experience weaving through their mind. But if the outer story, the timeline, must maintain coherence, how do these two threads interact? Picture a river flowing through a valley. The water has freedom to ripple, swirl and shift, but the riverbed guides its overall path. The traveller's consciousness is like the rippling water, full of movement and spontaneity. The timeline is like the riverbed, guiding the overall shape. The two exist together without conflict. In this sense, the traveller's choices remain meaningful, but the outcomes always align with the larger harmony of the loop. This perspective softens the anxiety that often arises around paradoxes. Instead of imagining a traveller fighting against the structure of time, We can picture them moving within a story already shaped to accommodate them. Their memories become part of the loop's design, and the loop becomes part of their memories. The two threads weave together until they are indistinguishable. The image becomes even gentler when we consider how the universe might prevent contradictions, not with force, but with subtle guidance. A traveller who might be tempted to disrupt the past could be gently nudged away from doing so, perhaps through coincidence, hesitation, or circumstances that quietly shift. Much like arriving at a crossroads just as a passing cart blocks the path you weren't meant to take. The universe doesn't forbid the action. It simply arranges events in ways that maintain harmony. And so, we begin to see that loops in time, when viewed through this soft lens, need not produce paradox at all. They can instead highlight the universe's quiet preference for coherence. They help us understand that even in the strangest shapes time may form, reality moves toward consistency the way a plant turns toward light, almost effortlessly. This idea prepares the way for a deeper question that waits ahead. If time guides itself into harmony when it loops, what becomes of the consciousness travelling through those harmonies? Does the mind adapt to the loop's shape? Or does the loop adapt to the mind's unfolding story? The answers lie just beyond the edge of this reflection, ready to open gently as we continue onward. There are moments in life when awareness feels like a soft lantern you carry with you. It lights only the space immediately around you, illuminating whatever part of the world you turn toward. The lantern does not change the landscape itself, yet without it, the landscape would remain hidden. In this simple act, the quiet uncovering of what already exists, lies a hint of what consciousness might be. Not a force that reshapes reality, but a gentle glow that reveals the shape of each moment as you move through it. When we speak of consciousness, we often imagine something complicated tied to tangled strands of biology or elaborate ideas about the mind. But at its core, consciousness is simply the experience of being here. It is the continuous stream of noticing, the rise and fall of breath, the warmth of a memory, the sound of rain against the window, the fleeting sensation of a thought forming and dissolving. It is the thread that stitches each moment to the next, turning a series of isolated instants into a life with direction and meaning. Without this thread, life would be like a stack of photographs scattered across a table, rich in detail, but disconnected. With consciousness, the photographs become a story, each image touched softly by the memory of the one before it, and the possibility of the one that comes next. This stitching, delicate and continuous, forms the sense of time that each of us carries within. It is your inner timeline, one that flows in a single direction, always forward, always unfolding. And yet, even as consciousness feels intimate and personal, some ideas suggest that it may be tied to something more universal. A school of thought called the integrated information perspective suggests that consciousness might emerge when different parts of a system share information in a deeply unified way. It is a gentle idea, the notion that awareness arises when many tiny signals, patterns, or rhythms come together as one coherent symphony. No symbols or formulas are needed to appreciate it. You can imagine it as the difference between random notes floating in the air and a melody forming when those notes converge in harmony. Another whispering idea, often associated with thinkers like Roger Penrose, imagines consciousness emerging from very small, very subtle patterns in the universe itself. Instead of being purely a product of biology, these patterns might be tied to the deep structure of reality, almost like tiny pulses or ripples that underlie physical existence. These pulses are far beyond ordinary imagination, far smaller than anything you could see under a microscope, yet some believe they may carry the seeds of awareness. Both of these ideas are not meant to be taken as rigid truths. They are gentle possibilities, like paths branching off from a quiet clearing in the woods. They simply invite us to imagine that consciousness might not be an accident of biology, but something more woven into the universe's fabric, a phenomenon that could arise wherever certain conditions allow it. Whether or not these ideas are correct matters less than the feeling they evoke. They encourage us to see consciousness not as a mere passenger moving through time, but as something with a deeper relationship to the flow of reality, a participant, a listener, perhaps even a subtle guide. To explore this further, picture time as a river flowing steadily in one direction. Your consciousness is a leaf floating along that river, moving with the current. You cannot drift backward, nor can you jump ahead. You move from one moment to another, always carried by the flow. This one-way motion is not an inconvenience. It is the very structure that allows you to experience a coherent life. But now imagine something unusual. What if the river bends or loops or meets another stream? If you, as a conscious leaf, were carried into such a curve, would your awareness remain smooth and continuous? Would it notice the bend? Could consciousness, accustomed to flowing forward, find itself moving through a path that returns to an earlier moment? This question sits quietly at the intersection of physics and philosophy. Physics explores how space-time behaves. Philosophy wonders how the mind experiences it. And consciousness, being both simple and mysterious, becomes the bridge between the two. When time behaves strangely, does the mind adapt? Or does the mind insist on its forward thread, even if the river flows differently? You can think of this by recalling moments in your life that felt like circles. Perhaps you revisited a place you hadn't seen in years, a childhood home, a quiet park, an old classroom. The surroundings brought back vivid echoes of earlier times, but you remained aware of who you were now, distinct from who you were then. Your awareness did not collapse into its earlier version. It carried the entire thread of who you had become. Even though the external world looped, your inner timeline stayed intact. This small experience reflects something important. Consciousness does not simply record events, it carries a sense of continuity that is independent of the world around it. It is not tied to a specific moment but to the flow between moments, and in this flowing, it might reveal something profound. Perhaps consciousness is not merely a passenger travelling through time, but a kind of compass that always points along a consistent direction, forward, no matter how the external timeline might twist. This thought grows even more intriguing when we imagine time loops, where external events might fold back onto themselves. Would consciousness still feel its unwavering forward motion? Would it recognise the repetition, or would the loop become part of the natural thread of its story? And if consciousness has its own internal direction, could it influence which parts of the loop become meaningful or stable? Here, we touch the edges of a deeper mystery, whether consciousness plays a role in selecting among different possible shapes that time could take, not by changing physics, but by choosing which experiences become part of its thread. As these ideas drift gently together, a question begins to form like a lantern glowing softly in the dusk. If consciousness has its own sense of direction, always moving from one moment to the next, what happens when time itself bends? Does the lantern glow along the curve? Does the thread reweave itself to fit the loop? Or does consciousness remain steady, tracing a path that feels linear even when the landscape beneath it curls? These questions do not demand answers. They are invitations, quiet ones, to imagine the relationship between awareness and the unfolding of time. When held lightly, they become the stepping stones that guide us toward the next part of this journey, where the mind meets possibilities branching like gentle trees in a many-layered forest. There is a certain calmness that settles in when you imagine your life not as a single line, but as a gentle maze of paths, each one opening quietly from the next. Some paths you walk, others you turn away from, many remain unseen, like corridors in a garden hedge you never thought to explore. And in this maze of possibility, consciousness becomes something like a soft guiding light, not forcing decisions, but illuminating whichever path you step into, giving shape and meaning to each turn. One way physicists have tried to understand the strange behaviour of tiny particles is by imagining that the universe itself might unfold like such a maze. Instead of forcing particles to choose a single outcome, the universe might allow every possible outcome to exist, each one forming a branch of reality as natural as a new leaf growing from a tree. This idea is often called the many worlds picture, but it can be understood more gently. Whenever something could happen in more than one way, the universe may simply allow all of those ways to exist in their own quiet branches. Imagine standing beneath a great tree at dusk, its branches stretching out overhead like a map of possibilities. Each branch represents a different version of how a moment might unfold, a conversation that went one way or another, a choice made gently or hesitated upon, a meeting that happened or never occurred. You live along one branch, moving forward through its leaves and twigs, but all the other branches exist too, reaching out into the twilight with equal grace, even if you never walk among them. In this soft picture, consciousness plays a very special role. It does not collapse the tree into one shape, it simply travels along one branch, experiencing it as the single thread of a life. You have no awareness of the other possibilities, just as you cannot feel the leaves on a distant limb of the tree while you stand firmly on your own. But the existence of your personal thread gives coherence to your journey. You walk one path, and that path becomes your story, even though many others stretch silently around you. This idea becomes even more intriguing when we imagine time travel within such a tree-like universe. Suppose someone could step from their branch into an earlier part of the tree, not to rewrite the past on their own branch, but to move gently into a different limb that diverged long ago. In this new branch, the traveller's memories would act like a lantern brought from one section of the maze into another. They would carry the imprint of a life lived elsewhere, bringing a unique thread into a moment where it was never originally woven. This lantern, this awareness, becomes a quiet marker of identity. No matter which branch the traveller steps into, their consciousness remains theirs, stitching together the story of their journey across the tree. It is not a force that changes the structure of the tree itself, but a constant presence that gives meaning to the path they experience. To make this image gentler, imagine wandering through a large library with countless rooms. Each room holds a different version of a story, the same characters, the same setting, but pages that diverge in subtle or profound ways. You walk through one room, reading its story as if it were the only version. But if you step into another room, the narrative changes. Your memories of the first room remain with you, even though the story on the shelf is different. You do not erase the version you left. You simply step into a different one, with your awareness as the bridge. In this way, consciousness becomes the traveller between stories, not the creator of them. It does not need to collapse possibilities into a single truth. Instead, it moves smoothly along one thread, while countless other threads shimmer quietly in the distance. This brings us to a question at the heart of tonight's theme. Could consciousness act like a gentle selector, choosing which branch of possibility becomes the experience we call the present? Not in a forceful or magical way, but in a way that mirrors the quiet act of observing in the world of tiny particles. When a particle is surrounded by multiple possible paths, the moment of interaction, the moment it touches a detector or meets a trace of light, selects one path for it. Not because the particle decides, but because the interaction settles the pattern. The universe chooses a story to tell in that moment. Perhaps consciousness works in a similar way. Perhaps each moment in life contains many soft possibilities, and awareness is the gentle guide that stabilizes one particular path, turning it into the lived experience, not by collapsing the universe, but by choosing which branch the story of the self continues along. Imagine a fork in a forest path. Two trails diverge into the trees, each with its own quiet beauty. When you choose one, the other does not vanish. It remains there, untouched, stretching gently into the greenery. But the moment you take a step, the trail beneath your feet becomes the story you're living. Your consciousness moves forward, and the forest rearranges itself into a single unfolding route. Not because the other trail ceases to exist, but because you are not walking upon it. This is the essence of consciousness in a world with many branches. It does not eliminate alternatives, it simply inhabits one. It is the thread that ties possibilities into a sequence, forming a path through a landscape that has many shapes. Now imagine a traveller who steps backward through time, not into their own past, but into a different branch where events unfolded differently. When they arrive, their awareness does not dissolve into that timeline. It remains intact, carrying memories from the branch they came from. They are like a reader walking from one room of the library into another, carrying a bookmark from the previous book. Their presence does not erase the story of that branch. It simply blends into it, becoming part of a new narrative. This leads to a gentle question with no sharp edges. If time offers many possible branches and consciousness flows along one of them, could the mind, quietly, naturally, act as the soft selector of which branches become personal experience? This question does not claim that the mind changes physics. Rather, it suggests that the way consciousness perceives time might be shaped by the path it chooses to inhabit. Just as a lantern reveals whichever part of the maze it illuminates, consciousness reveals whichever slice of reality it moves through, giving it coherence, colour, and meaning. The maze may be vast, but the path you walk is deeply yours, and perhaps that is what makes consciousness feel like more than just a passenger. It is the quiet traveller, the guide, the thread that weaves a single journey through, a landscape filled with possibilities. There are times in life when two people stand before the very same moment and walk away carrying two entirely different stories. Perhaps it was a conversation that felt warm and reassuring to you, but seemed uncertain or tense to someone else. Or a memory of a childhood event that you recall with clarity, while another person who stood beside you remembers it with different colours, different emotions, even different details. Reality, when viewed through the lens of personal experience, can seem wonderfully elastic. It bends slightly toward whomever is looking, offering each observer a subtly unique version of the world. In physics, this gentle mystery appears in something known as the Wigner's friend scenario, a thought experiment imagined not as a strict mechanical blueprint, but as a soft philosophical mirror reflecting how observers might see different realities, even when looking at the same event. To understand it, it helps to picture not a laboratory, but something simpler, quieter, and more familiar. Imagine two people in two different rooms, each reading a version of the same story. In the first room sits a person we'll call the inner observer. They watch a small event unfold, a coin gently falling to the table, landing either on its face or its back. For the person in the room, once the coin lands, the story is settled. They see the result clearly. They could even write it down in a small notebook. I saw the coin land this way. For them, the moment has unfolded, completed, and become part of their memory. But now imagine a second person outside the room, the outer observer, someone who has not yet looked inside. To this second observer, the entire room, including the person within it, and the coin they have just observed, exists as something not yet fully resolved. It is like a closed book they have not opened. The story inside is still unknown. From their point of view, any number of possibilities might still be quietly waiting inside that room. They have not yet read the page, so the page has not yet revealed its specific shape to them. This gentle difference in perspective creates the heart of the thought experiment. Two observers, two positions, two differing realities, one already settled, the other still open. The inner observer has a definite memory, a coin that has landed in one way. The outer observer, however, sees the entire situation as not yet resolved, because they have not interacted with it. The moment exists in a kind of soft ambiguity, at least from their point of view. It is not that either observer is wrong. They simply inhabit different vantage points in the unfolding of a moment. One sees the page turned, the other sees the book still closed, and the universe, patient as always, accommodates both perspectives without rushing to force them into agreement. Reality, in this sense, is not a fixed photograph, but a story, whose details are softly revealed to each participant at their own rhythm. To make the image even gentler, imagine two people listening to the same song from two different rooms. One has their ear pressed close to the speaker, hearing every note and nuance clearly. For them, the melody is already defined, the rhythm, the chorus, the tone. The other person stands far down a hallway, hearing only the faintest trace of the music. For them, the song is still unformed, a set of possibilities wrapped in distance. When they finally walk closer and the sound becomes clear, their experience of the song settles into its full shape. Before that moment, the melody lived in a kind of potential, waiting to be heard. The Wigner's friend scenario, softened into this picture, becomes less about disagreement and more about timing. It shows that reality may not always reveal itself to all observers at once. Instead, it may unfold gently, piece by piece, depending on which observer is looking and when. This brings us to something quietly profound. If two observers can disagree about what is real in the present, what happens when they try to agree about the past? Imagine again the two rooms. The inner observer has already witnessed the event and carries a memory of it, as clear and complete as any memory you might hold from your own life. The outer observer, still standing outside, has not yet looked in, and thus has no memory of the event. To them, the past inside that room is not yet finalised. It sits in a kind of unshaped state, waiting for them to open the door. Now imagine that the outer observer steps inside and their experience aligns with the inner observer's memory. The story becomes unified. But before that moment of alignment, each observer holds a different relationship to the past. One sees it as fixed and complete. The other sees it as something still waiting to be uncovered. The past itself, then, takes on a curious quality. It is finished for some observers and unfinished for others. This gentle mismatch does not imply that reality is chaotic. Instead, it suggests that reality unfolds through relationships. The relationship between observer and event, between memory and moment, between what has been seen and what has yet to be known. The universe may allow each observer to carry their own thread of experience until the moment those threads meet. And when they do meet, they weave into a shared version of the story. But if observers can disagree about the present and the past, even for a short time, what does this mean for time travel? If someone were to step into a past moment, would their experience of that moment depend on whether someone else, another observer, had already shaped it with their awareness? To imagine this softly, picture a memory you hold, perhaps from childhood. It feels complete because you have carried it with you for years. But imagine someone else stepping into that moment without your memory. For them, the moment would be new, untouched, unformed. They would see it with fresh eyes, while you would see it as something that had already settled long ago. Two observers, one moment, two experiences of reality. This idea is not a claim that the mind changes the past. Rather, it points to the delicate way awareness shapes our relationship with time itself. When you look closely at something, you place a gentle mark upon your experience of it. Your memories become the way your internal world organizes time, stitching the past into a coherent narrative. But someone without those memories steps into the same moment with a different thread, a different lantern of awareness. And so, the Wigner's friend scenario becomes more than a curious puzzle from physics. It becomes a soft metaphor for the way consciousness defines reality from the inside. It reminds us that what is real is not only a matter of external events, but also of the relationship between observer and moment, of how stories crystallize when seen and remain open when unseen. This idea prepares the way for something deeper. If observation shapes the way moments settle into place, then what happens when someone observes a moment that belongs to the past? Could their presence, their awareness, their quiet lantern of consciousness play a role in how that past is experienced? Not changing it, but completing it in a new and unexpected way. That question waits patiently in the next turn of the journey, like a room just beyond a half-open door. There is a quiet strangeness nestled within the idea of returning to the past. Not the dramatic kind imagined in stories. No flashes of light, no rushing winds, no sudden collapse of eras into one another, but a softer, more contemplative mystery. It begins with a single question. If a moment from long ago still exists somewhere within the fabric of time, what happens when a conscious mind steps into it? Does the moment simply unfold as it once did, unchanged and untouched? Or does the act of observing it create a new kind of clarity, a settling of possibilities the way a gentle hand might smooth the wrinkles in a cloth? To approach this thought, imagine a memory from your childhood. Perhaps a quiet morning in a room filled with soft sunlight, or the sensation of cool grass beneath your feet, or the sound of laughter drifting from a nearby porch. This memory feels complete to you, as if it has always been a fixed part of your story. Yet if you try to recall the details, the exact shape of a shadow, the precise colour of a wall, the direction of the breeze, you might find that much of it is hazy, filled in not by the sharpness of fact but by the gentle strokes of imagination. The past, even the one you lived, remains partly unformed until you look closely. Now imagine stepping back into that very moment, not through memory, but through some hypothetical fold in time. What would you see? Would the scene match your recollection, or would it reveal details you never noticed before? If you stand quietly in that past moment, the simple act of observing might give new definition to the scene, not changing what happened, but defining what was always possible yet never witnessed. Like turning a page in a book you thought you had read entirely, only to discover a paragraph you somehow missed. This is where the observer paradox deepens. In the world of tiny particles, the act of observing, which is really the act of interacting, settles a system into a particular state. A particle exploring many possible paths seems to choose one when measured, not because consciousness demands it, but because the interaction itself gives shape to the pattern. Possibilities, once open and fluid, become specific. If we let this idea drift softly into the realm of time, another question arises. If a moment in the past contains many quiet possibilities, details unrecorded, echoes unshaped, could the presence of an observer bring one of those possibilities into clearer focus? Consider a traveller who steps into a past moment they once experienced as a child. That child may not have noticed every detail, the direction of the wind, the flicker of a candle, the pattern of footsteps in the hallway. Those aspects of the moment remained unshaped in their memory. But when the older traveller arrives, their awareness might gently choose which faint possibility becomes part of the settled story of that moment, not by altering the past, but by giving form to something that once lay in the background, undefined. Imagine standing in a dimly lit attic and shining a lantern into a corner that had always been hidden in shadow. The objects in the corner were always there, waiting, but they become real to you only when you illuminate them. The light does not place the objects there, it simply reveals their presence. In a similar way, consciousness stepping into an old moment does not rewrite the story. It simply reveals a version of that moment that was always possible. This idea feels less like a bold claim, and more like a gentle invitation to consider how experience shapes reality. The past, even the past within your own mind, becomes clearer when revisited. You create the past in the sense that your awareness gives form to it. Without observation, the details remain soft like a painting left unfinished. With observation, they become sharper, more defined, more real. Now imagine a scenario that brings this to life. Picture a traveller returning to a childhood home they barely remember. As they walk through each room, the memories begin to settle into fresher patterns. The wallpaper seems more vivid than they expected. The creak of the floorboard sounds familiar. A scent drifting in from the kitchen stirs something deep and unspoken. They are not changing their past. They are shaping the experience of it through their presence, creating the version of the moment that now feels most true. In the same way, if a traveller were to step physically into the past, not through memory but through some bending of time, their awareness might settle the moment into a specific form, one among many quiet possibilities that had never been observed. The past becomes the past we experience, the past we inhabit, the past we illuminate. Of course, this is entirely speculative. The universe does not seem to allow us to walk backward through time, and even if it did, there is no evidence that consciousness would play such a role. These thoughts are meant not as scientific predictions but as gentle contemplations, explorations of how the observer paradox, softened into the language of human experience, might echo through the halls of time. In physics, when a system contains many possible outcomes, the moment of interaction determines which outcome becomes realized for the observer. This does not require awareness, it requires interaction. But in the world of lived experience, it is consciousness that interprets, organizes, and remembers. It is consciousness that forms the thread of personal reality. And so, the question becomes not whether consciousness changes the past, but whether consciousness, by revisiting a past moment, chooses which version of that moment becomes part of its story. If the past contains multiple, faint possibilities, some forgotten, some never noticed, does consciousness gently decide which of those possibilities becomes the stable memory? Think of a photograph that was slightly blurred when taken. Years later, as you look at it, you may focus on one element, a face in the background, a gesture, a shadow. That focus gives shape to your memory of the scene. The photograph does not change, but the story it tells becomes clearer. In this gentle sense, you create the past you remember. And if a traveller carried their consciousness into an earlier moment, they might experience something similar, a settling of the moment into a particular version, chosen not by force, but by the simple presence of awareness. This thought, soft and speculative, prepares us for a deeper idea waiting just ahead. The notion that the future too may play a quiet role in shaping the patterns we observe today. As if time were not only a river flowing forward, but a vast body of water where ripples from distant shores drift gently toward us, influencing how the present forms beneath our feet. There is a special kind of mystery that settles over you when you think about tomorrow, not the literal tomorrow marked on calendars, but the deeper sense of the future as a quiet ocean of possibilities. Some days the future feels close, like a soft breeze brushing your cheek. On other days it feels impossibly far away, hidden behind a horizon of thoughts and unknowns. And in rare moments, the future feels almost as though it leans toward you, whispering hints of what might come, as if some part of it were already aware of the path unfolding beneath your feet. In the world of tiny particles, there is an experiment often described in technical language, but it becomes far more soothing when imagined as a bedtime story. Picture a single particle, a tiny traveller drifting toward a pair of narrow doorways. If left completely alone, with no one watching its path, this traveller does something curious. It behaves as though it passes through both doorways at once. On the other side, it paints a delicate ripple pattern, like the soft overlapping waves formed when droplets fall into a pond at dusk. It is as if the particle explores multiple possibilities simultaneously, letting them all coexist. But now imagine that someone, or even something as simple as a quiet detector, tries to see which doorway the traveller uses. Just noticing its path changes what it does. the beautiful ripples disappear. The traveller seems to choose one doorway, a single line, a single possibility. Suddenly, the path becomes narrow and precise, no longer a gentle blend of many options. The act of observing removes the softness of possibility and replaces it with a single settled story. This might already seem strange enough, but an even more tender mystery appears when the noticing happens after the particle has already passed through the doorways. In these versions, the particle travels along its path without any detectors watching. It should, by all intuitive reasoning, create the ripple pattern, the one we see when no one watches. But researchers allow something delicate to happen. Only when the particle has moved far beyond the doorways do they decide whether to keep the information about which path it could have taken, or erase that information entirely. If they choose to erase the information, as though wiping chalk dust from a board, the particle behaves as if no one had ever watched. The ripples appear, but if they choose to keep the information, even though the particle is long past the doorway, the ripples vanish, replaced by the simple pattern created when only one path is taken. This does not mean the future is reaching back into the past. There is no secret message travelling backward through time, no tug of tomorrow reshaping yesterday. Instead, the entire picture only reveals its full meaning when all of the information across the experiment, including choices made later, is brought together. The patterns are not final until the entire story is complete. It is like reading a book and not fully understanding the first chapter until you reach the last. And yet, even knowing all this, the emotional experience of the experiment is impossible to ignore. It feels, in some poetic way, as though the future is influencing the present. It feels as though the universe waits quietly to see how the entire sequence of events will unfold before settling on the final pattern. It feels as if tomorrow, in its soft and hazy form, casts a gentle kind of light backward onto today. You can imagine this through a simple metaphor. Picture a painter working on a canvas. Early brushstrokes seem to be part of one shape, but only when the artist adds the final strokes, hours or even days later, do the earlier ones take on their true meaning. A line that looked like the edge of a mountain becomes, in the final painting, the silhouette of a tree branch. The earlier stroke was always there, but its identity was not fully known until the painting was complete. The final touches give clarity to the earlier ones. In a similar way, these particle experiments reveal a reality in which some aspects of a moment are only fully understood when later events unfold. The meaning of earlier actions sometimes depends on choices made later, even though nothing physically travels back through time to change them. It is not time itself that reverses, but our understanding, our ability to see the whole painting. This gentle unfolding brings us to a deeper image, the idea that consciousness, like the experimenter choosing whether to keep or erase information, might play a role in how moments feel settled or still open. Not in a scientific sense, the particles behave the same whether a human is present or not, but in a philosophical one. Awareness is the way you assemble the story of your life, deciding which parts to keep in memory and which to let drift into forgetfulness. In the same way the experimenter chooses to preserve or erase the particle's path, you choose which threads to weave into your personal history. There are moments when a decision you make in the future suddenly gives new meaning to something that happened long ago. A childhood memory becomes clearer when an adult realization shines light upon it. A past conversation gains significance after a new experience reframes your understanding. These are not changes to history, they are changes to interpretation. And interpretation is the way consciousness paints the story of time. Now imagine this idea extended into a world where time loops or branches, where the traveller's consciousness finds itself moving through unusual shapes of time. If the universe waits, in some sense, for all the pieces of a timeline to fall into place before revealing its full pattern, then a future observer, even a future version of yourself, might quietly influence which aspects of the present become meaningful, prominent, or emotionally vivid. This influence is not a force pulling you in one direction or another. It is more like the faint glow of a lighthouse at night. You may not see the full shape of the beam until you travel further along your path, but its presence guides you gently, helping you find your way across dark waters. Your future self, the one who understands more, the one who has already walked the path you're still beginning, may feel like that distant light, shaping the choices you make today, not by changing the past, but by giving it a direction. If consciousness is part of the universe's way of asking questions, then perhaps the future self asks questions too. Questions that slowly shape the way the present unfolds within you. Not through time travel causation, but through the way you grow, the way you interpret events, and the way your awareness shifts across the years. In this light, the delayed choice experiments become more than puzzles about particles. They become gentle metaphors for the human experience of time, the way meaning ripples forward and backward through our lives, quietly reshaping how we see ourselves. They remind us that the future, even though it hasn't arrived, can cast a soft reflection into the present, guiding us toward who we are becoming. And in that reflection, we may begin to sense that consciousness is not just carried by time. It participates in the shaping of time's meaning, revealing paths only when their full story is ready to be seen. There is a gentle comfort in imagining your life not as a straight road, but as a long shoreline, one where waves travel forward and backward along the sand with equal ease. You stand on the shore in the present moment, watching the water roll toward you from the future and wash away behind you into the past. The waves do not reverse time. They simply carry information in both directions, smoothing the sand, revealing shells, shaping patterns that only make sense when you step back and look at the entire stretch of coastline. When we think about the future, it is often in this way, as something hidden behind the horizon, yet quietly influencing the shape of the moments we live today. One of the most profound questions tied to consciousness and time is the idea that your future self, the person you have not yet become, may influence the path you are taking now. Not through time machines or backward causation, but through the way your mind anticipates, imagines, and prepares for what might come. In this sense, the future does not force the present. It whispers to it, guiding it in a soft, almost imperceptible way. Imagine your life as a story being written page by page. You do not know how the last chapter reads, but part of you senses its direction, like the faint scent of rain carried on the wind before the first drop falls. Each decision you make today is influenced not only by your memories, but also by your quiet expectations of who you may become. Even without knowing the ending, you lean toward it. You shape your steps according to a feeling of where the path may lead. In physics, the idea of future events seeming to shape present outcomes appears in the delayed choice experiments we explored earlier. Nothing literally travels from tomorrow to today, but the meaning of earlier steps becomes clear only when later choices are made. In human life, the same pattern unfolds. A choice you will make next month may someday cast new light on something that happens today, giving it a meaning you couldn't have seen in the moment. The future clarifies the present, not by changing it, but by completing its pattern. Consider the experience of growing older. At times, you may look back on a difficult moment from your youth and suddenly understand it more deeply because of something that happened much later. The moment itself does not change. It is your awareness, shaped by years of growth, that folds new understanding backward into your past. It is as though your future self reached back, not to rewrite your memories, but to illuminate them, like a lantern shining from a hilltop onto the winding road below. This gentle influence of the future becomes even more powerful when we imagine consciousness as something that moves along time the way a traveller moves along a path. You're always moving forward, even when you feel stuck. The thread of awareness stitches each moment to the next, and just as a traveller might navigate by looking toward a distant lighthouse, your current choices may be guided by subtle glimpses of who you hope to become. the person waiting for you on the horizon. Picture yourself on a dark sea in a small boat. The waters are calm, but the night sky hides the distant shore. Far ahead, faint but steady, is a light from a distant lighthouse. Not bright enough to reveal every detail of the coast, but bright enough to give direction. You row toward it, trusting that the light is real, even though you cannot yet see the land beneath it. The future self you imagine, wiser, calmer, more fulfilled, acts like that lighthouse. It guides your present actions, drawing you gently toward the version of your life that feels true and meaningful. This is not supernatural influence. It is the natural behavior of consciousness. The mind does not only remember, it anticipates. It shapes the present with shadows of what it has not yet experienced but quietly expects. This anticipation, this soft reaching toward possibilities, is one of the ways the future influences today. But if we stretch our imagination just a little further, we find a more speculative question waiting at the edge of these reflections. If consciousness can be influenced by expectations of the future, what happens in a world where time can bend or branch? Could the future self, in some mysterious and gentle way, become an observer of your present, guiding you towards certain paths much as a later choice in a delayed choice experiment clarifies earlier patterns? This idea does not claim that the future is fixed. In fact, it suggests the opposite, that the future is open, full of potential, and that your awareness is constantly reaching into that openness, feeling for a path that aligns with your deeper sense of who you want to become. When you feel drawn towards something without knowing why, a career, a relationship, a place, a dream, it may be that your future self, the version of you already shaped by those choices, is quietly influencing the direction of your steps. Not through force, but through attraction, like a pebble rolling naturally into a gentle hollow in the earth. Think of it in terms of intuition. Sometimes you just know which decision feels right, even when logic has not offered a clear answer. That feeling may be the soft pull of your future self, calling you gently toward a path that will one day make sense, even if it feels uncertain now. The future does not dictate the present, it invites it, and your awareness searching ahead responds to that invitation. This idea becomes even more poetic when we picture time as something more flexible than a straight timeline. If time has curves or quiet branches, your consciousness might follow the path that feels most harmonious, the branch where your future self is waiting. In this sense, the future does not need to send signals backward. Your mind simply moves forward in the direction of its own unfolding story, guided by the shape of the life you are growing into. You can imagine this through a small gesture, a seedling growing toward the sunlight. It does not know the exact shape of the plant it will become, yet it grows in the direction that allows it to thrive. Its future form calls to it, not through words or commands, but through the quiet guidance of light. In the same way, your future self shapes your present choices, not by altering time, but by giving your consciousness something to grow toward. As these thoughts drift together, the question becomes gentle and profound. What if the future is not fixed, yet still plays a role in shaping your present simply by existing as a possibility you are already moving toward? This thought does not demand certainty, it only invites awareness, the awareness that time may not simply push you from behind, but also pull you forward in ways you can feel but not articulate. In the quiet moments of your life, when you sense the direction in which you're growing, you may be feeling the soft influence of the person you're becoming, the future observer whose presence gives shape to your journey even before you arrive. There is a softness to the thought that consciousness might play even a subtle role in shaping how reality unfolds for us, not in the dramatic sense of bending physics or rewriting the past, but in the quiet human way that attention influences meaning, memory, and the emotional atmosphere of a moment. When we shift our focus, we shift our understanding. When we observe gently, the world seems to calm. And when we look with fear or anger, the same world can feel suddenly sharp. This interplay between awareness and experience raises a tender question. If consciousness helps determine which possibilities settle into our personal reality, then what responsibility do we carry for the shapes we help solidify? This question is not a burden. It is more like the gentle weight of holding a fragile object, a feather, a leaf, a small bird's egg. The responsibility is simply to be aware, to notice the influence of your focus, and to treat that influence with care. In physics, the universe does not bend to our emotions or our intentions, yet in the inner landscape of human experience, the act of observing changes the way the moment feels beneath our feet. It rearranges the emotional contours of time in ways that can gently shift the quality of our days. To explore this, imagine standing inside a greenhouse on a quiet morning. The air is warm, carrying the scent of soil and the soft murmur of leaves brushing against one another. Rays of sunlight fall through the glass panels overhead, creating bright pockets of light surrounded by gentle shadows. As you walk, you notice how your presence changes the environment. When you step near a plant, its leaves tremble slightly from the movement of the air. When you touch the soil, it shifts. When you move into the light, you cast a shadow that alters the warmth on the ground. Your influence is not overwhelming. It is subtle, delicate, but undeniably present. You cannot pass through the greenhouse without leaving some trace of your having been there. Footprints on the ground, a stirred current of air, the faint echo of warmth that your body carried with it. And just as your presence changes the greenhouse, your attention changes your inner world. What you notice grows. What you ignore fades. In this sense, consciousness becomes a caretaker of possibility. If the universe behaves in ways that allow multiple possibilities at small scales, and if time itself has room for many branching stories, then the way you navigate these possibilities, the ones that matter in daily experience, is shaped by your awareness. You choose which memories you keep close and which drift into the quiet corners of your mind. You decide where to place your emotional sunlight, which seeds of thought to warm and which to leave dormant. And here is where the ethical question arises gently. If your attention can influence the tone and shape of your own timeline, what responsibility do you carry toward yourself and toward others? This is not about guilt or obligation. It is about care. It is about noticing that your consciousness, small as it may seem, plays a role in determining how reality feels, the emotional version of events that becomes your lived truth. Imagine two people walking through the same meadow. One notices the wildflowers, the delicate flutter of petals catching the breeze. The other notices the uneven ground, the thorns, the dry grass. The meadow is the same, but each person's experience of it is shaped by what they allow their mind to rest upon. And when these experiences accumulate day by day, they shape the person's inner timeline, forming the emotional texture of their life. If consciousness shapes this emotional timeline, then there is a gentle moral invitation here to observe with kindness, not because it changes the universe, but because it changes the world you inhabit within yourself, and a softened inner world spills outward, influencing the experiences of those around you. There is another layer to this question, one that moves beyond personal experience and into the realm of imagined time travel. If a time traveller carried their consciousness into the past, and if their awareness helped settle which version of that moment becomes their experience, then their presence would carry a kind of responsibility as well. Not a heavy responsibility, but a quiet one. The responsibility to observe with care, to step gently into moments that feel fragile. Imagine stepping into a childhood memory, not as a child, but as an adult. You stand in a room filled with pieces of your younger self, toys scattered on the floor, sunlight filtering through curtains patterned with shapes you barely remember. In that moment, you would likely move slowly, aware of how delicate everything feels. You would not slam the door or speak too loudly. You would observe with reverence, knowing that the moment is precious, even if it is only precious to you. This imagined experience carries an ethical whisper. When we look at the past, even in memory, we do so with the power to soften it or harden it, depending on how we observe. If we revisit the past with anger, the memory tightens. If we revisit it with understanding, it loosens and reshapes itself, becoming gentler. In this sense, the ethics of observation applies not only to imagined time travel, but to everyday life. When you observe someone with harshness, they feel it. When you observe them with warmth, they feel that too. Consciousness, simply by existing, influences the emotional reality of everything it touches. This perspective does not turn consciousness into a cosmic force. It does not give the mind the ability to rewrite history. Instead, it reveals something more intimate. That awareness carries a moral dimension because it shapes the stories we tell ourselves, the memories we form, and the emotional trails we leave in the lives of others. To imagine this even more softly, picture a gardener walking through a greenhouse with a watering can. Each plant receives only a small amount of water, barely enough to alter the soil, yet over time, the garden becomes shaped by every drop. The gardener decides which plants grow tall, which remain small, which blooms flourish, and which fade. The act is quiet, almost invisible, but it changes the landscape. Your consciousness, in this metaphor, is the watering can. The moments you attend to with care grow in beauty and depth. The ones you avoid or neglect may wither. This is the quiet power of observation. Not to force the universe into a new shape, but to shape the inner universe you inhabit. When thinking about time, this idea expands even further. If you imagine a future version of yourself observing your present, offering guidance through intuition or hope, then it becomes natural to ask, what version of the future are you growing toward through your choices today? What kind of a light do you cast from ahead, illuminating the path you will one day walk? This question is not meant to induce pressure. It is meant to offer comfort. The comfort that your life is a conversation between the person you are and the person you are becoming. And consciousness, with all its gentle noticing, becomes the bridge connecting those two shores. As we let these thoughts settle, they begin to open a path towards something quieter still. The idea that your personal experience of time, your memories, your choices, and your gentle observations all weave together into a story that is uniquely yours. This story, shaped by awareness, becomes the soft thread that leads us into the final reflections waiting ahead. There is a quiet moment, often at the end of a long day, when you sit alone with your thoughts and feel time stretching softly around you. The past rests behind you, like a landscape viewed from a hilltop, familiar, intricate, and tinged with a kind of distant warmth. The future lies ahead like a forest wrapped in mist, full of shapes you cannot yet see. And in the middle of these two vast regions stands your awareness, the gentle observer who weaves both directions into a single, continuous thread. It is in this stillness that the idea of a personal observer paradox begins to emerge, not as a puzzle to solve, but as a quiet recognition. The way you look at your life shapes the story you believe you have lived. If we return to the gentle image of a lantern illuminating only the space immediately before you, you can imagine your consciousness carrying this lantern along the path of your life. Wherever the light falls, the moment becomes clear. Wherever it does not, the moment remains faint, like a painting only half glimpsed. When you look back into your memories, the lantern turns, casting light onto the past. And as soon as it touches those moments, they shift slightly. Not because the events change, but because the meaning you give them changes. Think of a memory from your childhood. Perhaps there was a moment when you felt uncertain or afraid, standing in a schoolyard, hearing unfamiliar voices, or waiting for someone who arrived later than you hoped. When you revisit that memory now, the feeling may soften. You may notice small details you couldn't at the time. A gentle expression on someone's face, the kindness in a gesture, or the resilience that was quietly forming within you. Your present awareness alters not the event, but the emotional shape of the moment you remember. In this way, consciousness acts like a soft brush, adding new colours to the canvas of your past. The strokes do not erase the original painting, but they blend and deepen it. The past becomes something living, something responsive to the perspective of the person you are now, a person who has walked through many seasons since those early days. This is the personal observer paradox, the idea that your memories, which feel so fixed, are continually shaped by your present awareness. Not because you intend to change them, but because meaning evolves with time. A moment once painful may become a lesson. A moment once overlooked may become precious. And a moment once forgotten may emerge with unexpected clarity, summoned by the lantern of your attention. To imagine this more visually, picture your life as a long tapestry hanging in a quiet hall. Each thread represents an experience, a feeling, a moment of significance. But the tapestry does not reveal itself fully at once. It is illuminated only by the soft circle of light that moves with you as you walk along its length. Sections behind you may appear different when you pass by again, not because the threads have changed, but because the light falling upon them now is warmer, richer, shaped by who you have become. Your present self is always revisiting the past, offering new interpretations. This is not rewriting, it is understanding. Interpretation is the way consciousness completes the unfinished edges of memory, filling them with perspective, compassion, and context. This idea grows even gentler when we imagine how attention shapes not just memory, but identity. The parts of your life that feel central to who you are, your kindness, your fears, your strengths, become central because you observe them often. The moments you dwell on, revisit, or carry with you become the pillars of your self-understanding. And the moments you release, the ones you no longer return to, fade into the soft background of lived experience. Attention, in this sense, is a sculptor. It chisels your identity by choosing what to highlight. The stone is your timeline, the sculpture is your sense of self, and consciousness, with all its quiet choosing, determines the contours of that sculpture. Now imagine how this applies to the present. When you go through your day, hundreds of small moments unfold around you. Sensations, interactions, decisions. Only some of them become part of your story. A compliment may stay with you. A disappointment may linger. A moment of stillness may anchor you. These moments stay not because they are objectively more important than others, but because you allow your awareness to rest upon them. Attention is the thread that carries meaning forward. This brings us gently to the future. If the past is shaped by how you observe it, and the present is shaped by where you place your attention, then perhaps the future, still unformed, is shaped by what you choose to move toward. Not in a magical sense, but in the simple way that your awareness gravitates towards certain possibilities, nurturing them, feeding them, allowing them to take root. Imagine your future as a garden waiting to be planted. There are countless seeds, dreams, fears, habits, hopes, each with the potential to grow into something real. The seeds you water with your attention become the plants that rise. The ones you neglect remain dormant, never sprouting into events or choices. This is the gentle power of consciousness. It directs growth. Your future self then becomes the gardener you're slowly becoming. Every moment of noticing, every step of intention, every gentle thought is a drop of water falling onto one seed or another. You're shaping the emotional landscape of the life ahead of you, simply by choosing what to nurture inside your mind. This is the heart of the personal observer paradox. You do not control time. but you influence the story of your time. You influence how the past feels, how the present forms, and how the future grows. Not through force, but through awareness, the soft but persistent shaping of meaning. If we return to the larger journey of this video, this idea ties everything together. Particles change their behaviour when interacted with. Time may bend in unexpected ways. Observers play a role in settling possibilities, but at the human scale, the scale of breath, memory, emotion, the observer paradox becomes something deeply intimate. The recognition that your awareness shapes the timeline of your life in ways both subtle and profound. Perhaps this is why noticing matters. Noticing is the act of choosing what becomes part of your story. It is the quiet way you participate in the unfolding universe, not by altering reality, but by illuminating the parts of it that become your truth. And as these reflections move gently toward the final session, we begin to see a soft truth rising on the horizon. The idea that simply by existing, by observing, by remembering and by choosing, you are already travelling through time in the most profound way we know. There is a moment, usually very late at night, when the air feels still and the world seems to pause. The sounds around you soften. Your thoughts slow into long, drifting shapes. And somewhere in that quiet, you feel the gentle presence of your own awareness, steady, continuous, watching as time unfolds moment by moment. It is in this stillness that the final idea of our journey comes into view. The idea that consciousness is not simply carried by the universe, but participates in it, shaping the meaning of time in ways more tender than we often realize. To understand this, imagine once more that you are a traveller walking through a vast landscape. The land stretches endlessly in every direction, hills rolling into valleys, trees whispering in the wind, rivers cutting quiet paths through the earth. You move through this world by following the thread of your awareness, one step after another. Each step reveals a small portion of the scenery, like lifting a veil one corner at a time. You do not control the landscape. The hills and rivers are already there. But the way you experience the landscape, the meaning it carries, the story it becomes in your memory, depends entirely on how you walk through it. In this way, your consciousness transforms the world from a collection of moments into a journey. Time becomes not just something that passes, but something you participate in, gently shaping through the simple act of noticing. This is what it means to be a conscious traveller in a participatory universe. You're not a spectator watching time from a distance. You're woven into it, stitched thread by thread into the fabric of each unfolding moment. The universe provides the canvas, but consciousness provides the brushstrokes that give the canvas colour and purpose. Throughout this exploration, we have gently followed the way tiny particles behave when observed, how time bends in the presence of motion or mass, how paradoxes arise when stories fold into loops, and how consciousness threads its way through these mysteries with quiet persistence. Each idea, on its own, is complex. But when softened into imagery and placed side by side, they reveal something deeply human. The universe does not need us to shape its laws, but it invites us to participate in the unfolding of our own meaning. Imagine for a moment that time is a great river flowing from an unseen spring toward a distant ocean. You cannot stop the river, you cannot push it backward, but you can decide where to stand along its edge, which reflections to notice in the water, which stones to skip across its surface. You can choose the moments you hold close and the ones you let drift away. These choices do not change the river's flow, but they change your experience of it, the story you carry as you walk beside it. In this sense, consciousness becomes the quiet sculptor of meaning, and meaning, in turn, becomes the way you travel through time. But what does it mean for the universe to be participatory? It does not suggest that reality waits for consciousness before it can exist. Stars burned long before eyes ever opened beneath them. Rivers carved their paths long before minds learned to understand their curves. But at the scale of lived experience, the human scale, the scale of breath and emotion, observation plays a gentle role. It shapes memory. It shapes understanding. It shapes the emotional colour of each moment. A sunrise is simply the earth turning. Yet in the eyes of a conscious observer, it becomes a symbol of renewal, a source of peace, a moment of connection. A whisper of wind is simply moving air. Yet in the mind, it becomes a reminder of impermanence, or comfort, or a distant voice calling from childhood. Consciousness gives texture to the world, just as the world gives structure to consciousness. This is the quiet partnership at the heart of a participatory universe. Not dominance, not control, but relationship. Now imagine applying this partnership to the idea of time itself. If time is flexible on cosmic scales, curving around stars, stretching near immense gravity, flowing differently for different travellers, then consciousness does not merely float along that flexibility. It feels it. It interprets it. It shapes the inner experience of time, even when the external structure remains untouched. We often think of time as a line, but consciousness experiences it as a loop of memories, a constellation of emotions, a mosaic of moments that return again and again in dreams, reflections, and quiet thoughts. In this inner world, the past is always alive, shaped by present understanding. The future is always approaching, shaped by present imagination. Time moves forward, but consciousness weaves it into a tapestry where threads cross, connect, and shimmer with meaning. This brings us gently to the soft conclusion of our journey. You do not need a time machine to travel through time. You're already doing it. Every moment you revisit in memory, every version of yourself you grow toward, every possibility you nudge into being with your attention. This is time travel of the most intimate kind. Consciousness slips backward into childhood through memory. It reaches forward into possibility through hope. It loops through familiar thoughts and fears, sometimes moving in circles, sometimes in spirals, always carrying the quiet imprint of your inner world. And perhaps this is the most profound form of time travel available to us. Not the ability to step into another century, but the ability to shape the meaning of the life we are living right now. If the universe has taught us anything through its quiet experiments, from the tiny traveller moving through two doorways, to the delayed choices that reveal their meaning only at the end, it is that patterns are not always settled until they are seen in full. Your life is like that too. The meaning of earlier moments may not become clear until later chapters. The shape of your journey may not reveal itself until you have walked further along the path. But even now, in this quiet moment, you are participating in that unfolding. You're not a passenger watching time drift by. You're the traveller who gives the journey its shape, through awareness, through memory, through imagination, through the gentle act of noticing. And as the night grows still and your thoughts grow softer, you may begin to feel that time, with all its mysteries, is not something distant or cold. It is something you live within, something that lives within you, something that bends and breathes with every moment of consciousness you bring into the world. You've been travelling through time since the day you first opened your eyes, and you will continue to travel gently, meaningfully, luminously, with every breath you take.